Hey everyone, it's Joe and welcome back to Humanfluence. Today we're diving into one of the most significant and often misunderstood topics in religious thought. Salvation. We'll explore how different traditions understand salvation, whether through good works, faith in Jesus Christ, or a combination of both, and more importantly, we'll unpack how Jesus' teachings have been interpreted and sometimes misinterpreted over time. For many Christians, the belief that salvation comes only through the belief in Jesus is central to their faith. But when we take a closer look at Jesus' actual teachings, we find a broader, more inclusive message, one that emphasizes compassion, kindness, and living a moral life, rather than focusing exclusively on faith alone. We'll also look at how Jesus' identity evolved from being seen as a prophet and teacher to being declared as God in the flesh by the early church. A transformation that would have a profound impact on how his teachings were understood.
In a world seeking light amid darkness, we must ignite awakened consciousness, awaken your soul, ignite your inner fire, evoke your inner wisdom. For when you confront your own shadow, you unveil your inner light, Humanfluence, creating a new reality.
Let's start with one of the most famous but often misunderstood statements from Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, many Christians interpret this to mean that only belief in Jesus can lead to salvation. But we need to look at the historical and cultural context of this phrase. In the time of Jesus, the word way didn't necessarily imply exclusivity. It referred more to a way of living or a path that aligned with God's principles. He was likely pointing to his teachings and example as the way to connect with God, not to himself as the exclusive gatekeeper of salvation. Over the centuries, as the Bible was translated and edited, the statement was increasingly interpreted to mean that only faith in Jesus leads to salvation, diminishing the importance of his broader message about living a life of love, compassion, and humility. Then we have the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is one of the clearest examples of Jesus teaching salvation through good works, and it comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. When asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus responds with a story about a Samaritan, someone marginalized by society who shows compassion to a wounded man when others ignored him. Jesus concludes by telling his listeners to go and do likewise, meaning that it's through acts of love and kindness that we align ourselves with God's will. This powerful message that salvation can come through compassionate actions has often been overshadowed by the later focus on belief alone is the ultimate path to salvation. The next example is the sheep and the goats in Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. Jesus speaks about the final judgment and separates people into two groups, the sheep and the goats. The sheep are those who fed the hungry, gave water to the thirsty, and cared for the sick and imprisoned. Jesus welcomes them into eternal life, not because of their faith, but because of their good works. The goats, on the other hand, are condemned for ignoring the needs of others, emphasizing that how we treat the vulnerable is a critical aspect of salvation. Yet over time, this clear message about the importance of good works has been minimized in favor of the idea that faith in Jesus alone is what grants salvation. Now, one of the most significant shifts in Christian theology came with the question of whether Jesus was a prophet or God in flesh. In the first few centuries after his death, many early Christian groups viewed Jesus as a human teacher or prophet, a man who was sent by God to show the way, but not necessarily divine himself. However, over time, particularly through the work of early church councils, such as the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the church declared that Jesus was not only a teacher or prophet, but God incarnate, both fully human and fully divine. This formalized belief became central to Christian orthodoxy. The Nicene Creed, developed during this council, firmly established the idea of Jesus' divinity, marking a major turning point in Christian doctrine. This shift was politically motivated as much as it was theological. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who convened the council, sought to unify the Christian church under one belief system to solidify his political influence. The belief in Jesus as God was cemented into the structure of Christianity, and over time this view dominated how salvation was understood. Faith in Jesus as God became essential for salvation, replacing the earlier, more diverse interpretations of who Jesus was. Then we have Paul's influence and the emphasis on faith. The emphasis on faith alone as the key to salvation is traced back to the teachings of Paul. In his letters, especially in Romans and Galatians, Paul teaches that people are saved by their faith in Jesus, not by following the Jewish law or by doing good works. While Paul's message was crucial in spreading Christianity, it also helped shift the focus away from the more holistic message of Jesus, who preached both faith and good works as pathways to God. Paul's writings became hugely influential, and as Christianity evolved, Paul's theology of salvation by faith became more prominent than the teachings of Jesus about acts of love and compassion. This led to centuries of theological interpretation, prioritizing faith over good works, despite Jesus' teachings on how we treat others. Finally, we need to consider the role of Bible revisions in shaping how salvation is understood today. As early Christianity developed, many texts and interpretations that offered alternative views of Jesus and salvation were left out or revised. The Gnostic Gospels, for instance, portray Jesus more as a spiritual teacher who leads people to self-realization, rather than as God incarnate who demands exclusive faith. Additionally, during the translation of the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, and later revisions, certain phrases and teachings were altered or emphasized to fit the Orthodox view that faith in Jesus as God was the only path to salvation. And over time, these revisions pushed aside more inclusive understandings of Jesus' message that focused on good works, spiritual awakening, and self-knowledge. So the evolution of how Jesus was understood from a prophet and teacher to God incarnate has had a profound impact on Christian theology and the way salvation is viewed. What began as a message of compassion, love, and moral living, over centuries became a doctrine centered on faith alone. The political and theological shifts that solidified Jesus' divinity also shifted the focus of salvation away from good works and toward belief in his divine nature. Yet, when we look closely at the teachings of Jesus himself, we see a more inclusive and compassionate message. One that emphasizes how we live our lives, how we treat others, and how we seek spiritual connection with a higher power. So whether you believe that salvation comes through faith, good works, or a combination of both, the core teaching of Jesus remains to live in love, to show mercy, and to seek truth beyond the distractions of the material world. Hey, it's Joe, and welcome back to Humanfluence. In one of my last videos, we explored the balance between faith in Jesus and good works as paths to salvation, seeing how they have been interpreted throughout history. And in this video, we're diving even deeper with 10 more examples from the Gospels and other scriptures that show how salvation is more than just belief. It's also about how we live our lives and treat others. And this doesn't even touch upon the Gnostic teachings, which I cover in depth on this channel, which offer a whole nother perspective on salvation and Jesus' message. So, let's dive in.
In a world seeking light amid darkness, we must ignite awakened consciousness, awaken your soul, ignite your inner fire, evoke your inner wisdom. For when you confront your own shadow, you unveil your inner light, Humanfluence, creating a new reality.
Our first example is the rich young ruler. In Mark chapter 10, verses 17 through 22, when he asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus doesn't just talk about faith. Instead, he tells the man to follow the commandments and then go further by selling all his possessions and giving the money to the poor. This is a clear example where salvation is tied to acts of charity and selflessness, not just belief. Then we have the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, where Jesus gives some of his most famous teachings, focusing on mercy, humility, and peacemaking. He speaks about how those who practice these virtues will be blessed and receive God's favor. Rather than focusing solely on belief, Jesus stresses that salvation comes through how we live and treat others, especially the vulnerable. Then we have the letter of James, where we see an important counterbalance to the idea of salvation through faith alone. James says clearly, faith without works is dead. In his view, claiming to have faith without backing it up with good deeds is meaningless. Again, reinforcing the idea that good works and actions are essential to salvation, reflecting the life Jesus himself led. Then we have the parable of the two sons in Matthew chapter 21, verses 28-32. Jesus tells the parable of the two sons, where one son initially refuses his father's request to work in the vineyard, but later does so, while the other says he will work but never goes. Jesus shows that action matters more than words. It's not what we say or believe that counts, it's what we do. The son who followed through and worked in the vineyard despite initially refusing represents those who act on their faith. Next we have the widow's mite in Mark chapter 12, verses 41-44. This story teaches that true generosity is about giving from the heart, not just from abundance. When a poor widow gives 2 small coins, Jesus praises her above the wealthy people who gave larger sums because she gave everything she had, highlighting that sacrifice and generosity, regardless of their amount, are critical aspects of a moral life that Jesus taught. Then we have the story of Zacchaeus. In Luke 19, we meet Zacchaeus, a wealthy tax collector. After meeting Jesus, he promises to give half his wealth to the poor and to repay anyone he's cheated 4 times over. Jesus responds by saying, "Today salvation has come to this house." His salvation comes not just through faith, but through generosity and restitution, demonstrating how good works and acts help with salvation. Next, we have the parable of the talents, Matthew chapter 25, verses 14-30, where Jesus tells a story of a master who gives his servants talents, a form of currency, before going on a journey. The servants who invest and grow their talents are praised and rewarded, while the one who buries his talent out of fear is condemned. This parable is often seen as a lesson about using our gifts and opportunities wisely, taking action and being productive in ways that align with God's will. For those who actively contribute are rewarded, emphasizing that action and effort are key parts of faith. Next, we have the parable of the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15, verses 11-32, which tells the story of a young man who wastes his inheritance, but later returns to his father in repentance. His father welcomes him back with open arms, demonstrating forgiveness and grace. And while this parable emphasizes repentance, it also shows the importance of taking responsibility and changing one's life for the better, key actions that lead to reconciliation and salvation. Next, we have the parable of the good tree, Matthew chapter 7, verses 17-20, where Jesus speaks about a good tree bearing good fruit and a bad tree bearing bad fruit. He says, "By their fruits you will know them." This is a clear metaphor for good works. A person's true faith and character are shown by their actions, just as a tree is known by its fruit, reinforcing that good works are not just an afterthought, they are evidence of true belief. Lastly, we have the golden rule, found in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This teaching is foundational to the message of Jesus. Treating others with kindness, fairness, and respect are key to living in alignment with God's will. Jesus highlights that good works and compassionate living are the essence of following God's laws. As we explored in these 10 additional examples, the teachings of Jesus emphasize that salvation is about more than just belief. It's deeply tied to how we live, how we treat others, and the good works we do. From the parables of the talents and the good tree to the golden rule, it's clear that faith and action must work together. And remember, this is just scratching the surface. Gnostic teachings, which I cover in other videos, offer a completely different take on salvation and Jesus' message. Hey, it's Joe, and welcome back to Humanfluence. This is part 3 of salvation versus good works and what will get you into heaven. In parts 1 and 2, we explored the deep connection between faith and good works and the path to salvation. Today, in part 3, we're taking it even further with 10 all-new examples from Scripture that continue to challenge the idea of blind faith and show us that true salvation involves action, transformation, and living with purpose. So let's get into it. First, we have the healing of the blind man, which comes from Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26, where Jesus heals a blind man in 2 stages. At first, the man can only partially see, but after a second touch, his vision is fully restored. Here we have a metaphor for faith. It's not always an instant transformation. Sometimes salvation is a gradual process that involves both spiritual and personal growth. Faith opens that door, but the journey requires continual refinement of both our beliefs and actions. This idea of ongoing growth is a key theme in the Bible. It's not about having one big moment of belief, but rather taking consistent steps to live in alignment with that faith. And as we move forward, we'll see more examples of how Jesus teaches that, and how our actions matter just as much as our belief. Next, we have the faith of the Canaanite woman. Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. This Canaanite woman begs Jesus to heal her daughter. At first, Jesus seems hesitant, but her persistence pays off. Jesus praises her great faith and heals her daughter. Another example about how faith is not passive, it's active, persistent, and relentless. The Canaanite woman doesn't just believe, she fights for her daughter's healing, showing us that faith often requires action and perseverance. Our next example is Jesus calming the storm, Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, where Jesus calms the storm while the disciples panic. After the storm is stilled, Jesus asks, "Why are you afraid?" Faith is not passive. It's an active choice to trust and stay calm even when things seem out of control. In this case, good works are represented by the internal discipline to act with faith, not fear. As we can see, faith without works is incomplete, whether it's persistence, discipline, or courage. Good works are the actions that make faith tangible. Let's explore another example where leaving behind the old life is the ultimate act of faith in action. The call of Matthew. In Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13, Jesus calls Matthew, a tax collector, to follow him. Matthew doesn't just believe in Jesus, he gets up, leaves his lucrative but morally questionable job, and follows. A profound example of how salvation requires action, not just belief. He changed his entire life, showing us that good works often mean making difficult sacrifices to live in alignment with our faith. Next, we have the cleansing of the 10 lepers, Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Jesus heals 10 lepers, but only one returns to give thanks. Jesus acknowledges this act of gratitude, saying, "Your faith has made you well." But let's break that down. It wasn't just faith that healed the man, it was his action of returning to give thanks, showing us that salvation isn't just about what we receive, but about how we respond and act in return. Gratitude is a good work that reflects a heart transformed by faith. These examples reinforcing that good works are not just extra, they're essential to living out faith. Whether it's leaving behind the old life, expressing gratitude, or acting with courage, the path to salvation is built on what we do, not just what we believe. Now let's move on to an example that shows how we should use our resources wisely. The parable of the unjust steward. Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. The unjust steward, a manager who, despite being dishonest, uses his final days wisely to settle debts. Though he's far from perfect, his shrewd actions are praised. What does this tell us? It's not enough to have faith, we must act wisely and with purpose in how we live and use our resources. Here, good works are more than moral actions. They're also about making wise, intentional decisions. Again, in alignment with our faith. Next, we have the raising of Lazarus. John 11, verses 1 through 44. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, but before that miracle happens, we see Martha and Mary take action by seeking out Jesus. Their faith wasn't just belief, it was active. They reached out for help, and through their actions, Lazarus is raised. Faith, paired with good works, leads to life-changing results. Faith and action go hand in hand, and the Bible makes it clear time and time again. Good works brings faith to life. Our next parable focuses on sacrifices we make. Next, we have the parable of the hidden treasure, Matthew 13, verse 44. Jesus tells the story of a man who finds a hidden treasure and sells everything he has to obtain it. But what does this tell us about good works? Sometimes living out our faith requires great sacrifices. The man's willingness to give up everything he owns shows that good works often involve letting go of worldly attachments in order to live in alignment with a higher purpose. Example 9, Jesus and the fig tree. Mark 11, verses 12 through 14 and 20 through 25. Jesus curses a barren fig tree for not bearing fruit, a direct metaphor for faith that doesn't produce good works. A tree that doesn't bear fruits is useless, just as faith that doesn't result in action is empty. Jesus uses this example to show us that good works are the natural outcome of true faith. Without them, faith is hollow. And as we get closer to the end of part 3, it's important to remember that good works aren't just suggested, they're expected. They are the fruits of our faith. And with that, we'll finish with Peter walks on water. Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. We have the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus calls Peter out to the boat, Peter steps forward in faith, but when he starts to doubt, he sinks. This story shows us that faith requires bold action, stepping out off the boat, even when it's risky or uncomfortable. Good works are about trusting our faith enough to act, even when it's difficult. And when we falter, we can trust that Jesus will catch us, but we still need to take that first step. So there you have it, 10 more examples from Scripture that show how good works are essential to salvation, coupled with faith. Whether it's the persistence of the Canaanite woman, the sacrifice of the man seeking the hidden treasure, or Peter's courageous step off the boat. Stories, metaphors, and allegories to illustrate that faith without action is incomplete. Remember, it's not about what we believe, it's about how we live, how we treat others, and what we do in the world. Hey everyone, it's Joe, and welcome back to Humanfluence. This is our final part on our series on salvation. Over the last 3 parts, we've explored how good works and faith are intertwined. Examples in Scripture showing how salvation is not just about belief, but also about how we live our lives. But as we wrap up this series, we're going to take a step back and reflect on something even deeper. The personal nature of the path to salvation. Christianity tells us that salvation comes through faith in Jesus alone. Other religions offer different routes. Some focus on enlightenment, others on good deeds and following a specific path. And this is where the division often starts, but when we set aside the dogma and open our minds, we begin to see that these teachings, while different on the surface, share an important commonality. The journey to salvation is a personal one.
In a world seeking light amidst darkness, we enlighten minds, we awaken souls. Together we ignite the spark of transformation. For when you confront your own shadow, you unveil your inner light. Humanfluence, creating a new reality.
Salvation is our own journey. The truth is, it's individual. It's something we must all navigate for ourselves. There isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, and while one religion may preach that good works will never get you there, another may emphasize them as essential. The reality is that these are different perspectives on the same goal: transformation of the self, a return to the divine, or alignment with a higher power. The scriptures are full of nuance, and when we open our minds, we see that salvation might be less about following rigid rules and more about living in alignment with love, compassion, and higher truth. The division we see in the world today is often fueled by these religious differences. This sense that my way is right and yours is wrong. But what if we let go of the dogma? What if we focused on what truly matters? How we treat others, how we live, and how we act in this world. At the core of every major religion, every spiritual teaching is the same essential message. Be kind, love others, live with integrity. Whether it's Christianity telling us to love our neighbors as ourselves, Buddhism teaching compassion for all beings, or Islam emphasizing charity and good deeds, the common thread, it's not just belief, it's action. Whether it's the argument over faith and good works or simple misunderstandings, if we focus on living in harmony with these core principles, the details of dogma fade into the background. So where does this leave us? We've spent the last 3 videos looking at the examples where faith and good works come together in the Bible. We've seen that salvation, at least from the perspective of Jesus' teachings, is not about sitting back and believing. It's about living your faith through action. But the larger point here is this: we all have our own path to walk. So as we bring this series to a close, let's think about what that means. If salvation is our own journey, then the way we get there might look different than another person. Some may find their way through deep faith in a higher power, while others may focus on living a life full of good works, compassion, and service. The point is, there is no single right path. The beauty of faith and spirituality is that it's deeply personal. And this is where I think we can find unity rather than division. When we let go of the need to be right about salvation, and we open ourselves to the idea that there are many ways to live a spiritual life, we can start to bridge the gaps between us. The messages of love, kindness, and compassion is universal, whether we express it through faith, good works, or a combination of both. Now, to wrap things up, let's do a rapid-fire list of ways you can actively live out your own salvation every day. These are not about following dogma, but about living a life aligned with higher values. First, we have practice compassion daily. Start small, be kind to others, even in tough situations. Forgive often. Holding grudges blocks your growth. Let go of resentment. Give freely, whether it's time, money, or support. Helping others elevates your spirit. Seek knowledge. Keep an open mind and always be willing to learn more. Be grateful. Cultivate gratitude for what you have. It changes your perspective. Meditate or pray regularly. Connect with the divine or your inner self daily. Act with integrity. Live your truth even when it's difficult. Help the less fortunate. Acts of service are central to nearly every spiritual path. And love unconditionally. Practice loving without expecting anything in return. Stay humble. Recognize that your journey is just one of many, and we're all learning. And let's add to this 12 powerful sayings of Jesus that remind us how central good works, love, and compassion are to salvation. Love your neighbor as yourself. A clear call to treat others with kindness and compassion. Do to others as you would have them do to you. This golden rule emphasizes moral living and good works. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God, highlighting the importance of working for peace in the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. Jesus directly connects salvation with acts of charity and compassion. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Love in action is the hallmark of true faith. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Jesus calls us to let our good works be visible to the world. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. True greatness is found in serving others. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Forgiveness is a key part of living a spiritual life, freeing both ourselves and others. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Acts of generosity are central to Jesus' message. If you love me, keep my commands. Following Jesus' teachings requires both belief and action. The greatest among you will be your servant. Serving others is central to the life of faith. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus reminds us that what we value in life and how we act on that reveals the state of our heart. In the end, the journey to salvation is not something anyone else could dictate for us. Yes, there's a general path, but it's a personal path, one that we walk every day with our choices, our beliefs, and our actions. The Bible, along with other sacred texts, offers guidance, but ultimately, it's up to us to live in a way that resonates with our deepest truth. Whether you find yourself drawn to faith, good works, or a blend of both, the key is to stay open-minded, compassionate, and true to yourself. Leave a comment below, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Thanks for checking out this series on good works versus salvation, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing on your own journey. Humanfluence, out.